everyone. Today we are going to learn what is p-value and statistical significance, and the p-value plays a very important role in inferential statistics, where we need to make the inferences from the sample data that is taken from a population to make the required decisions. So let's see what is p-value, and we will also have an example so that you can easily understand its concept. So today's lecture is very important, so watch till end. So here I have written the definition of the p-value beforehand. That is, p-value is the probability of null hypothesis beating alternative hypothesis. I have discussed in detail regarding the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis in my previous lecture. So you must have to visit that lecture to understand the both types of hypothesis, so that you can easily go through this lecture of p-value. So p-value is basically how likely it is that the null hypothesis beat the alternative hypothesis. Means whatever stated in the null hypothesis will win as compared to the alternative hypothesis. Let's have an example. So to understand the p-value, we have to go step by step. So here our step number 1 is we have to state the hypothesis. So hypothesis is basically based on the research question. So our research question here is, does the earthquake increase the anxiety level? So based on the research question, I have drawn two diagrams here. The first one is the diagram of the population and the second is of the sample. So here we have, let's assume that the mean anxiety level of the population is equals to 100. While while I assume that, or it's my research question, that does the earthquake increases the anxiety level? It means the earthquake increases the anxiety level, and I have to check that through my research. So for that purpose, we will have to state the hypothesis, the null as well as alternate hypothesis. So the null hypothesis is stated as H naught is equals to 100 after earthquake, even after earthquake, which is showing that there is no effect of earthquake on the mean anxiety level. While the alternate hypothesis will be that we try to prove that the mean anxiety level will be greater than 100 after earthquake. So in null hypothesis, we try to show that there is no impact of earthquake on the anxiety level, while in the alternate hypothesis, we complement the null hypothesis that there is an effect of earthquake on the mean anxiety level. So after that, the second step is we have to mention the significance level. Now what is that? So our second step is the significance level. Basically mostly use significance level, or you can say it's alpha. Basically a threshold of the p-value, like it could be 0.05 or you can say 5%, or alpha is equals to 0.01, that is 1%, or 0.1, that is 10%. So what is the significance level? Basically significance level refers to the amount of risk or chance that we take or that we consider that null hypothesis will beat the alternate hypothesis. This is the threshold that we set, or you can say that this is a conventional value that is being set for comparing it with the p-value. It is necessary that significance level should be set before the experiment, and it is very necessary, and you have to keep this in your mind, that, and it's mostly 0.05 or 0.01, and this is the level with which we will compare the value of p to check the statistical significance. Now the next step is, in order to prove that the earthquake increases the anxiety level, you have to take the sample from the population. That, as I have mentioned here, that you have to take the sample from the population in order to check whether the earthquake affecting the anxiety level or not. So for that, the next step is take the sample and find its mean standard deviation, that is find the mean standard deviation, so that it can be helpful for using in the further statistical tests. Now the next step is, once you get the mean and standard deviation from the sample data, the next step is to use those values or use those measures to find the p-value using different statistical tests. So the fourth step is find p-value using statistical tests. It means those statistical tests that the data you have gathered in the form of a sample, and after calculating the mean and standard deviation, that is the measures of variability, after gathering the data, you have to find the p-value using statistical test. What is the purpose of this p-value? As I've already mentioned, that p-value help you to tell whether the probability of a null hypothesis is higher in beating the alternative hypothesis or lower. So find p-value using statistical test. Now, which statistical test? There are different statistical tests like t-test, like z-test, like chi-square test, and so on. All these tests will give you the p-value, will give you by calculating the p-value, and you can do this by using different softwares, and that's very easy. So once you get the p-value, what will be the next step? So on the basis of the p-value, we can make informed decisions about what we can conclude from our results. So in the fifth step, where you have to see whether the p-value is greater than the alpha or p-value is less than the alpha. So let's suppose the p-value is 0.03. This p-value we have got from where? From using the different statistical tests. So 0.03. Now 0.03 is less than 0.05. That is the significance level. So alpha is showing this. So here our p-value is less than alpha, that is 0.05, then which means null hypothesis is rejected. What does it? It means the probability of null hypothesis beating the alternative hypothesis, that is p-value, is very low, and it is even lower than our significance level that we have, or you can say that the threshold of p-value, it is even lower than that. So we cannot accept the null hypothesis. It means null hypothesis is rejected and the alternative hypothesis is accepted, which means that the earthquake increases the anxiety level. So if in case we have a p-value equals to 0.07, that is greater than 0.05, then what will be the result in such a case? In such a case, we cannot say that null hypothesis is accepted. We will say that we fail to reject the null hypothesis. It means that the probability of null hypothesis beating alternative hypothesis is greater now. That is, the p-value is greater and even greater than the threshold that we have set in the significance level. So we fail to reject the null hypothesis. We cannot say that we accept the null hypothesis. It means you are asserting that your experiment has no effect, or your experiment is by chance. No, we have to say that we fail to reject it, or we have insufficient evidence to reject it. When the chance of beating the alternate hypothesis is low, as in this case when we have the p-value of 0.03, this is the same as saying that the results have statistical significance. So these results are statistically significant. If I write here statistically significant. So that's all from today's lecture. Thank you.